Do not look so frightened, my dear. The evening is just beginning.
She did not plan it. She did not think. She simply reached sideways into the crowd, grabbed the nearest hand she could find, and held on. The hand was warm, large, unhurried. It closed around hers with a steadiness that she had not expected from a stranger, and that steadiness alone was enough to make her breath catch. "There you are," she said, loud enough to carry, turning her face toward the man whose hand she had just seized without introduction, without permission, without a single rational thought to justify it. "I've been looking everywhere for you." She did not look at him directly. She could not afford to. Her eyes were fixed on the figure moving through the crowd toward her. Lord Harwick, with his careful smile and his cold, possessive eyes, and she needed the man beside her to simply play along for 30 seconds. That was all. 30 seconds, and Harwick would see she was not alone, not unprotected, not the same woman he had humiliated at the Alderman's Ball 3 weeks ago in front of half of London society. 30 seconds. The man beside her did not pull away. He did not stiffen or turn to look at her with confusion or offense. He simply laced his fingers gently through hers, a small, deliberate gesture that felt nothing like a stranger's response, and said, in a voice so low and unhurried that it seemed to come from somewhere much older than the glittering charity gala surrounding them, "I apologize for keeping you waiting." Novalie Ashwell exhaled. Harwick slowed. He was close enough now that she could see the exact moment he registered the man at her side, the way his eyes moved upward, and then upward again, taking in height, and then breadth, and then something else entirely that she could not yet name. Whatever he saw, it stopped him. He inclined his head in an awkward acknowledgement that was not quite a bow, turned, and moved away through the crowd without a single word. Just like that. Gone. Novalie stood very still for 3 full seconds, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then she released the hand. She turned. The man she had grabbed was watching her with dark, quiet eyes. He was tall in the way that made other men seem smaller by proximity. His coat was plain, no insignia, no royal orders pinned to the lapel, nothing that should have made Harwick's face change the way it had. He held a glass of champagne in his free hand as though he had never moved, as though women grabbed him in crowds regularly, and he had developed a perfectly composed response for it. "Thank you," Novalie said, and she meant it with every mortified bone in her body. "I am sorry for that. Truly. He is—" She stopped. "It doesn't matter what he is. Thank you." The man tilted his head, very slightly. "He frightened you." It was not a question. She did not know what to do with the directness of it. "He embarrassed me once," she said carefully. "I did not wish to give him the opportunity to do it again tonight." Something moved behind those dark eyes. Not pity. She would have turned and walked away from pity. It was closer to recognition, as if he understood the precise difference between being frightened and being humiliated, and respected that she had named the right thing. "He won't bother you again tonight," the man said simply. She almost laughed. The confidence of it was extraordinary. "You don't know that." "I do," he said, and his voice carried that same quiet certainty she had felt in his hand, and she believed him without knowing why. She remembered her manners then, which had temporarily abandoned her in the panic. She straightened. "Novalie Ashwell, Viscount Ashwell's daughter." "Raphael," he said. Just that. No title. No family name. No state. She waited for more. He offered nothing. And because she was still shaking slightly from the confrontation, and because the room was loud and warm, and she was tired of being brave in public, she did not press him. "Well," she said, "Raphael, thank you for being a convincing stranger." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something more contained. "I found it surprisingly easy." She laughed then, a real one, surprised out of her, and she saw something change in his expression. Not dramatically, nothing she could point to, just a subtle shift, like a man who has been watching a closed door and has just seen it open an inch. She did not notice it. She was already excusing herself, already moving back toward the crowd, already tucking the strange moment away into the category of things that had happened and would not happen again. She did not look back. He watched her go. The next morning arrived with weak April light, and her lady's maid Cecile practically vibrating with suppressed information before the tea had even been poured. "My lady," Cecile began, in the tone that meant she had been awake since before dawn processing something, "I must ask you something, and I need you to not dismiss it before I finish." Novalie, still half asleep, gestured for her to continue. "At last night's gala, the man you were speaking with near the West Terrace." Cecile paused. The tall one, dark eyes, no insignia. Novali set down her teacup. Yes. Do you know who he was? He told me his name was Raphael. Cecile stared at her. Then she closed her eyes briefly, as a woman does when she is trying to locate composure that has temporarily migrated. My lady, that was Crown Prince Raphael of the House of Vane. She opened her eyes. Heir to the throne of England, he was attending incognito, a bet. And apparently, this morning, his secretary has made inquiries about the identity of a certain Viscount's daughter. The room was very quiet. Novali heard the clock on the mantel, heard a cart on the street below, heard, distantly, the absolute collapse of everything she had assumed about the previous evening. I grabbed his hand, she said. Yes, my lady. I told him to play along with a fiction I invented on the spot. Yes. And then I told him he was a convincing stranger and walked away. Cecile's expression was a masterwork of diplomatic restraint. That does appear to be what happened. Novali put her face in her hands. She spent 3 days expecting something, a formal reprimand, a social consequence, a letter from some palace official explaining that one did not manhandle members of the royal family at charity events without appropriate documentation. None of those things arrived. What arrived instead was an invitation to the Countess of Morrow's dinner, which she had been attending for 3 years, and which had never before required any particular emotional preparation. This year, for some reason, Cecile spent 40 minutes on her hair. She understood why the moment she entered the drawing room and saw him. Crown Prince Raphael looked entirely different when he was not being incognito. He stood near the fireplace in formal dress, deep navy, gold at the collar, the quiet authority of a man who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to command a room. 3 other guests were speaking to him. He was listening. And then he was not listening, because his eyes moved to the door at precisely the moment Novali stepped through it, and they stayed there. She almost left. She did not leave. She was a Viscount's daughter, and she had survived worse than eye contact, and she was not going to let Lord Harwick turn her into someone who fled dinner parties. The Countess of Morrow, a small woman with the navigational instincts of a general, had already appeared at her elbow. Miss Ashwell, come. I believe you know most of the company. Ah, and of course His Royal Highness you may have met briefly at the Alderman Gala. Briefly was an extraordinary word for what had happened, but Novali accepted it. She curtsied. He bowed. His eyes did not leave her face. Miss Ashwell, he said, and the way he said it, careful, deliberate, as if he was committing the full syllables to something, made her very aware that he had gone out of his way to learn her name properly. Your Royal Highness, she replied. I find I owe you a more formal apology than circumstances allowed for 3 nights ago. You owe me nothing, he said, and he sounded as though he meant it precisely. The apology, if one is required, belongs to the man who put you in a position where grabbing a stranger's hand seemed like the better option. The Countess of Morrow, a woman who had navigated 30 years of social seasons, took one look at the 2 of them and decided to be needed elsewhere. They were not quite alone. The room was full. But Novali felt the particular quality of attention he gave her, the kind that made everything else recede slightly, not because the world had gone quiet, but because he was listening to her as though what she might say next was the most interesting thing he expected to hear all evening. It was, she realized with mild alarm, deeply effective. You found out my name, she said. I did. Was that, she chose her words, was that curiosity or protocol? Curiosity, he said, without hesitation. Protocol would have moved on. She studied him. In the firelight, without the distance of the gala, she could see that he was younger than the gravity of his manner suggested. Not young exactly, but not the remote, ancient institution she had imagined all her life when she thought of the crown. He was a man, one who was looking at her with an expression that was neither courtly nor calculating, but simply direct. May I ask you something? He said. You are the crown prince. You may ask what you like. I would prefer to ask Raphael, he said, if that is permissible. Something in her chest did something she chose not to examine. Ask, why did you stay at the gala? After I left you, you could have gone home. The evening had already cost you something. She considered lying. She had a perfectly polished social lie ready, something about obligations to the hostess or other friends she wished to greet. She heard herself say instead, because I refuse to let him decide which rooms I'm allowed to stand in. Raphael looked at her for a long, still moment. Good, he said quietly. He doesn't deserve that power. Later, during supper, he was seated 4 places away and across the table. exactly far enough that conversation between them was impossible without drawing attention. She told herself this was a relief. She spent most of the first course aware of exactly where his hands were when he reached for his wine. He caught her looking once. She looked away first. He did not. It began after that evening in a way that she could not have named precisely. He did not send flowers, which would have been conspicuous. He did not write letters, which would have been compromising. What he did somehow was simply appear. At the lending library on Thursday morning, browsing the philosophy section when she came in for a new volume of poetry. He nodded. She nodded. They spoke for 11 minutes about whether Seneca was genuinely comforting, or merely elegant in his argument that suffering was instructive. He thought Seneca was half right. She thought he was being generous. At Lady Castleton's exhibition on Saturday afternoon, standing before a painting of a winter coast that Novaly had stopped in front of without planning to, he came to stand beside her, and they were quiet together for a moment before he said, "It looks like Cornwall in November," and she said she had never been to Cornwall, and he said that was something that should be corrected, and she said she would add it to her list, and he said he hoped she would tell him when she did. She went home and sat with that sentence for a long time. She was not naive. She understood what his attention meant in the context of the season, of the political pressures on a crown prince approaching 32 without a formal betrothal. She understood that there were 50 women in London better positioned, better connected, and more strategically suited to the role his life required. She also understood more privately that he kept appearing in rooms where she happened to be, and that he never lingered at her side long enough to cause comment, and that he was doing this with the quiet precision of a man who was being very, very careful not to expose her to consequence while still closing the distance between them, inch by inch, in the particular unhurried way of someone who has decided where he is going, and sees no reason to rush. She did not know what to do with it, so she did nothing, and went where she had always gone, and tried not to notice that Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays had quietly become the days she paid more attention to her hair. The letters she did not admit to herself she was watching for never arrived. What arrived instead, in the 4th week, was Lord Harwick. Not in person, not directly. What arrived was a whisper, the kind that moves through drawing rooms and morning calls like smoke, shapeless and specific at once. That Miss Ashwell had deliberately manufactured a scene at the Alderman Gala to attract the Crown Prince's attention, that she had researched his incognito attendance and positioned herself accordingly. That she was a clever, ambitious woman doing what clever, ambitious women did when they had run out of more honest options. It was precisely the kind of rumor that was impossible to disprove because it required only motive, and everyone who was inclined to believe it already had their version of her motive assembled and waiting. She heard it first from Cecile, who had heard it from the grocer's wife, who had heard it from a lady's maid across the square. She heard it second from her mother's anxious letter, which arrived on a Friday and contained the phrase, "What are we to do about this?" Novaly 3 times in increasingly smaller handwriting. She heard it third, indirectly, when she attended Lady Cavendish's afternoon reception, and noticed the particular way 3 women who had previously been warm to her suddenly found reasons to be warm elsewhere. She went home. She sat in the window. She thought about what had come before this, the gala, the dinner, the library, the exhibition, the careful accumulation of moments, and she thought about what came after it, which was a scandal, a ruined season, a family name attached permanently to the word scheming, and a crown prince who had, by no fault of his own, simply been in the wrong place when a desperate woman grabbed his hand. She decided, quietly, in the way she decided most things, that she would stop. She would withdraw from the events where she might encounter him. She would let the rumor run its natural course without further fuel. She would protect her family from the consequence of her one impulsive moment in a crowded room. It was the sensible thing, the right thing. She did not particularly want to do it. She did it anyway. The Royal Garden Party at Ashcroft Hall was, technically, the first event she attended after her self-imposed withdrawal, and she attended it only because her father had committed them both before the rumors began, and withdrawing now would have seemed precisely like the guilty retreat Harwick wanted people to see. So she went. She wore pale yellow, because she was not going to perform grief for a situation she had not caused. She smiled at the right people. She accepted strawberries from a passing footman, and stood near the rose border and looked, she hoped, like a woman who was having a very pleasant afternoon. It was, in fact, a perfectly pleasant afternoon, until the Duke of Caldwell appeared. He was charming, genuinely, effortlessly charming in a way that required no effort at all, which was either a gift or a very well-practiced art. He was handsome and funny, and when he asked her to dance the first turn of the afternoon, she said yes, because he was nothing to be afraid of, and she was tired of being afraid. He asked for a second dance. She said yes to that too, because the alternative was standing near the rose border, trying not to look like she was watching the far terrace, which she was absolutely not doing. During the second dance, he leaned in and said something about the gardens being particularly lovely from the east path, and wasn't it a shame they were stuck in the formal arrangements, and wouldn't she like to? A hand settled at the edge of the dancing space. It was not grabbing. It was not aggressive. It was simply there, the way a door held open is simply there, requiring no dramatic announcement. "I believe," said a voice that she now knew would always make something in her chest do that thing she had decided not to examine, "that Miss Ashwell promised me this next piece." She had promised him nothing. They both knew it. The Duke of Caldwell knew it too, and he was a smart enough man to read the room. To read the 11 feet of the Crown Princes contained quiet, entirely Arctic displeasure, and he stepped back with a gracious smile that cost him something and bowed them both off with a dignity she genuinely respected. Raphael guided her to the edge of the dancing, one hand at her back, the angle of his shoulders blocking them from the most direct sight lines. Not hiding. He was incapable of hiding, but creating a space. She looked up at him. His jaw was set. The careful composure was intact but thinner than usual, like paper held over a lamp. "I didn't promise you anything," she said quietly. "I know. You interrupted." "I did." She studied his profile. "Why?" He turned then and looked at her fully, and the garden party continued around them, the music and the laughter and the warm April air, and none of it touched the particular gravity of this moment, the two of them standing at the edge of things. "Because," he said low and private and direct in the way he always was when he had stopped performing composure, "I will not watch another man walk you into the dark." Novalis' heart did not merely skip. It stopped, completely, and then resumed at a pace that had nothing to do with the dancing. His hand was still at her waist. She could feel the warmth of it through the layers of pale yellow silk. The entire garden was watching them. She was not sure she cared. The garden party ended the way such afternoons always did, with carriages and farewells, and the polite dispersal of people who had been watching something unfold all afternoon and now needed to go home and discuss it in private. Novalis said nothing to Raphael as he walked her back to her father. He said nothing to her, but his hand remained at the small of her back for the length of the garden path, not possessively, not dramatically, simply present, the way he was always simply present, as if proximity to her was a decision he made without needing to announce it. Her father, Viscount Ashwell, was a quiet man who had survived 30 years of London seasons by noticing everything and reacting to nothing in public. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the Crown Prince. He said, "Your Royal Highness," with a bow that was perfectly calibrated, and then he said nothing else. Raphael handed her into the carriage with a courtesy that was impeccable and unnecessary and made her feel, briefly and inconveniently, like something precious. "Miss Ashwell," he said, when she was settled. She looked down at him from the carriage step. "Your Royal Highness." He held her gaze for exactly 1 moment longer than protocol required. Then he stepped back. The carriage moved. She stared at the ceiling of the carriage all the way home and told herself, firmly, that none of this was going to end well, and that she needed to make peace with that before it made a casualty of her. Her father watched her from his corner of the carriage seat and said nothing for a very long time. Then, as they turned into their street, he said simply, "He is not what I expected." "No," Novalis agreed quietly. "He isn't." The letter arrived 3 days later, not from Raphael. From her father's solicitor forwarding correspondence from a parliamentary liaison whose name she did not recognize, and whose purpose became clear in the second paragraph. Lord Harridge had submitted a formal complaint to the royal household. The language was careful, precise, and devastating. It alleged that Miss Novalis Ashwell had obtained advance knowledge of the Crown Prince's incognito attendance at the Alderman Charity Gala, that she had deliberately positioned herself to manufacture an encounter, and that her subsequent appearances at events also attended by His Royal Highness represented a pattern of calculated social maneuvering designed to exploit the Crown's goodwill for personal and familial advancement. It concluded by noting that the Crown's dignity was a matter of national importance, and that associations formed under false pretense reflected poorly on both parties involved. Novali read it twice. Then she set it down on the writing table very carefully, the way you set down something that might break, if handled with the emotion it deserves. Her mother, reading over her shoulder, made a small, stricken sound. Novali, it's all right, Mother. It is not all right. This could see us barred from court. Your father's appointments. I know what it could do. She picked the letter back up. Read the third paragraph again. I know exactly what it could do. She sat with it for an hour. During that hour, she thought about the library and the exhibition and the garden party. And she thought about a man who had sat across from her at dinner, 4 places away, and watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. And she thought about 12 steps across a lawn and a hand at the small of her back, and I will not watch another man walk you into the dark. And then she thought about what it would cost him, what it would cost the crown, what it would cost the quiet precision of everything he had been doing. If she became a scandal he was expected to distance himself from. She thought about that for a very long time. Then she put on her coat and told Cecile she was going to take the air, and instead walked to Raphael's townhouse, which was not the palace, but a residence he maintained for parliamentary sessions, and she arrived at the door and asked to see him, and she stood in the entrance hall feeling the full weight of what she was about to say. She had not planned this. Again, it appeared she was not a woman who planned well in moments that mattered. He came out of the study within 2 minutes, which told her he had been told who was at the door. He was in his shirt sleeves, working, not receiving, and he stopped when he saw her face. "You've seen the complaint," he said. She blinked. "You already know." "I was informed this morning." His expression was controlled in the particular way of a man keeping something very hot behind very calm walls. I had already begun composing a response. "Don't." He went still. "Novali, don't respond. Don't defend me formally. Don't make this a matter that requires the Crown's official position, because the moment you do that, I become a problem that the Crown has to manage." She had rehearsed this. She was not sure it was landing the way she intended. "Let it go quiet. Let me go quiet. Harwick will move on when he has nothing left to feed on." Raphael looked at her. His hands were very still at his sides. "That is an extraordinarily dignified solution," he said. "It is also wrong. It protects you. I don't require protection from a jealous man's invented complaint." His voice was low, but there was an edge in it now, something sharp and deliberate. "And you—" He stopped, started again. "You have spent this entire season protecting everyone around you. Your family is embarrassed. Me from association with a scandal I had a hand in creating by appearing in your life without considering the consequence to yours. You pulled away these past weeks. Did you think I didn't notice?" She had not thought about what he noticed. She had been rather focused on what she was losing. "You know why I pulled away," she said. "Yes." His eyes were direct and steady. "You thought it was the right thing, the careful thing, the thing that costs you the most and protects everyone else. A pause. You're doing it again right now." The entrance hall was very quiet. Somewhere in the house, a clock measured the silence. Raphael. She said his name the way she had learned to say it, without the weight of the title, just the word, just the person. "What is it that you want from this? From me? Because I need you to say it plainly, not carefully, not diplomatically. I need to know what you are actually. You," he said. The word fell into the room without preamble or architecture. "I want you, Novali. That is the plain version. That is the only version." She stared at him. "I have wanted you since you grabbed my hand in a crowded room and looked at me like I was a person who might be useful." He continued, and his voice was not composed now. It was something rougher and more honest than she had ever heard from him. "You didn't know who I was. You looked at me like I was just a person. Do you understand how rarely that happens? Do you understand what it is to spend 32 years in rooms full of people who have already decided who you are before you have spoken a single word?" He moved toward her, slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back. She did not step back. "You decided nothing about me, you just held on. And when I was useful you said thank you and walked away, and I could not stop thinking about it." She was going to say something reasonable. She had several reasonable things prepared. "I am not a suitable choice for you," she said instead. "Politically, socially. The complaint is Harwick's last weapon," Raphael said, "and I intend to remove it from him, not for my sake, for yours." He was close now, not improper, but close enough that she could see the amber in his dark eyes and the faint tension in his jaw from the effort of saying true things plainly. "But I need you to not run from it first. "I don't run," she said, a little sharply. The corner of his mouth moved. "You withdraw with extraordinary elegance, which is different, but not by much." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Let me handle Harwick," he said, "and then let me—" He stopped. Something moved across his face, a vulnerability she had not seen there before. Not at the gala, not at dinner, not in all the careful accumulation of libraries and exhibitions. "Let me try. That's all I'm asking. Not a declaration, not a commitment, just the chance to be in the same room as you without either of us performing any version of retreat." Novali looked at this man, this impossible, careful, quietly devoted, occasionally infuriating man who had crossed a garden lawn in 12 steps because he did not want to watch another man walk her into the dark. She thought about all the sensible things she should say. "All right," she said. His exhale was almost inaudible. Almost. "All right," she said again, more firmly. "But I want to be clear. If you make me a figure of court pity, if your solution to Harwick's complaint turns me into the woman the Crown graciously vindicated, I will withdraw for real, and no amount of appearing in lending libraries will change that." "Understood," he said. "And the next time you interrupt a perfectly civil dance without invitation, I'll do it again," he said simply. "I'm aware that's not what you were going to say. I'm telling you the truth, anyway." She stared at him. He looked back at her with that infuriating, warm, immovable steadiness. "Good night, Raphael," she said. "Good night, Novali." She walked to the door. She did not look back. But this time, the not looking back was different. This time it did not retreat. It was something more like the composure of a woman who is walking towards something rather than away. She thought he might know the difference. What happened next moved quickly, which surprised her, because Raphael was not a man who seemed to do anything quickly. She learned afterward, from Cecile, from her father, from the solicitor's letter that arrived within the week, that within 48 hours of their conversation in the entrance hall, Raphael had done 3 things. First, he had personally reviewed Harwick's complaint with the royal household's legal counsel and identified 6 factual inaccuracies, including the claim that Novali had advance knowledge of his incognito attendance, which was demonstrably false because the incognito arrangement had been a last-minute decision made within the royal household itself and communicated to no one outside it. Second, he had requested, through appropriate channels, that the Alderman Gala's guest list and seating arrangements be formally reviewed, which revealed that Novali had been placed on the opposite side of the room from where he had been standing, which meant the grab had been entirely circumstantial, which meant the entire premise of Harwick's complaint collapsed. Third, and this was the part that made her sit very still when she read it, he had sent a private communication to Lord Harrogh directly, the contents of which were not disclosed, but the effect of which was that Harwick withdrew the complaint entirely within 24 hours of receiving it, citing a desire not to cause further distress to the parties involved. She thought about what a private communication from the Crown Prince of England might say to a man who had built his self-image on social power and the ability to ruin women who crossed him. She thought it must have been very clear and very final, and delivered in a tone that left no room for misreading. She found, to her mild surprise, that she was not particularly troubled by this. She had spent enough time being careful about other people's feelings. Harwick had not extended her the same courtesy. What troubled her slightly was the parliamentary function. She did not attend it willingly. She attended because her father's seat in the Lords meant he was expected, and because he asked her to accompany him, and because she was not going to give Harwick's ghost the satisfaction of her continued absence from rooms where she had every right to stand. It was a large affair, the kind of event where parliamentary business and social season overlapped, where the men discussed bills over wine, and the women discussed the men over tea, and everyone pretended this was simply an evening among colleagues. The Marquis of Pemberton's London house was large enough that she had been there for 20 minutes before she registered the particular quality of the crowd's attention shifting, the way a room shifts when something has entered it that changes the air. She looked up. Lord Harwick was standing near the center of the room with 3 men she recognized as his political allies, and he was talking, and she could not hear what he was saying, but she could see the direction of his gaze, which was toward her, and she could see the particular performance of his expression, the long-suffering, regretful expression of a man sharing a difficult truth with concerned friends. She understood immediately. The formal complaint had been withdrawn, but a formal complaint was a document. A man's voice at a social gathering was something else entirely, harder to contain, harder to disprove, liquid and shapeless, and perfectly suited to doing damage while leaving no evidence. She set down her teacup. She straightened. She was going to walk to her father, and she was going to suggest they make their polite farewells, and she was going to leave this room with her head up and her expression pleasant, and she was not going to give Harwick one visible moment of victory. She had made it halfway across the room when the evening changed. She heard it before she saw it, the particular shift in ambient sound that happens when someone with authority speaks, not loudly, but with the kind of certainty that cuts through noise the way a clean note cuts through a chord. "I wonder," said Crown Prince Raphael, from somewhere to her left, at a volume that was perfectly conversational and yet somehow audible to every person within 30 feet, "whether Lord Harwick might be willing to repeat, in the presence of his legal counsel and mine, the claims he appears to be making this evening." The room went absolutely still. Harwick turned. The pleasant expression on his face underwent a rapid and visible rearrangement. Raphael was standing near the fireplace with a glass he had not touched, and he looked exactly as he always looked, composed, unhurried, as if the silence that had fallen around him was simply the natural state of rooms he inhabited. His eyes moved from Harwick to the men around him to the broader assembly, and then with the deliberate unhurriedness of a man who is making a point, to Novaly. He held her gaze for exactly 1 second. She read in it, "Stay." She stayed. "Lord Harwick," Raphael continued, his tone carrying the formal weight of a man who has just decided to stop being polite and start being precise, "submitted a complaint to the royal household 3 weeks ago alleging that Miss Novaly Ashwell engaged in calculated deception to manufacture an association with the Crown." He paused, a pause that the entire room felt. "That complaint was withdrawn. It was withdrawn because an investigation of the facts revealed it to be based on demonstrably false premises." Another pause. "I find myself curious, therefore, about what is currently being discussed in this corner of the room. Whether the conversation here represents new information, in which case, I invite it to be presented formally and reviewed with appropriate rigor, or whether it represents the repetition of claims already proven false, which would be a different matter entirely." The silence was extraordinary. Harwick's face was the color of old chalk. The men around him had each discovered, independently and simultaneously, that they had pressing reasons to be elsewhere. "Your Royal Highness," Harwick began, with the careful voice of a man assembling a retreat in real time. "I assure you I meant no—" "I want to be very clear," Raphael said, quietly, with the particular gentleness that is far more devastating than anger, about what I mean. "Miss Ashwell is a woman of character and integrity. Her presence at the Alderman Gala was coincidental. Her action that evening was spontaneous and unremarkable, and the association that has developed between us since is one I have sought, not one that was arranged or manipulated by anyone. If that is unclear to anyone in this room, I am happy to make it formal." His eyes moved briefly back to Harwick. "I trust that it is now clear." It was clear. It was, in fact, the clearest thing that had happened in this room all season. Harwick inclined his head in a bow that contained the complete absence of dignity and removed himself from the situation with as much speed as was socially possible. Raphael set down his untouched drink and crossed the room. Crossed it toward her, while the entire assembly watched, while the silence held its particular texture of held breath and suspended judgment, while Novaly stood in the middle of the Marquis of Pemberton's floor and felt her heart doing something she could not have described to anyone. He stopped in front of her. He extended his hand. Not the formal offer of an arm for escort, just his hand, open, palm up, the same way she had grabbed it 3 months ago in a crowded room without introduction or permission. The same hand, the same gesture, reversed. "Miss Ashwell," he said quietly, "just for her. I believe this is ours." She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She thought about everything she had done to be careful, and everything it had cost her, and everything she had nearly retreated from because caution felt safer than hope. She put her hand in his. The room exhaled around them. The formal announcement of the betrothal was made 3 weeks later. It was brief, precise, and produced across London society, a reaction that moved in stages. Scandal first, then fascination, then the slow, reluctant capitulation of people who had expected something conventional and were being offered something true. Lady Seraphine Aldwych, widely assumed to be the Crown's preference, was reported to have received the news with aristocratic composure and then gone immediately to her mother's house for a very long visit. Novaly felt, quietly, that this was fair. She sent Lady Seraphine a note of genuine goodwill. She did not know whether it was received in the spirit intended. She hoped it was. Her mother cried. Her father read the formal documents 3 times, and then sat in his study for a long while, and when he came out his eyes were bright, and he held himself slightly straighter than usual. Cecile spent an entire week in a state of barely managed triumph. Lord Harwick did not comment publicly. He was not invited to comment. He was not, notably, invited to much of anything in the weeks that followed, which was not something anyone arranged deliberately. It was simply the natural consequence of rooms that had heard a crown prince speak clearly about where his loyalty lay. 1 year later, almost to the week, the Alderman Charity Gala opened its doors for the new season. The ballroom was the same chandeliers, the same warm press of bodies, the same string quartet working through something elegant in the corner. The same roses in the centerpieces, the same subtle anxiety of the season's new debutantes, the same particular quality of London's social light that made everything look slightly more significant than it was. Novalie arrived early. It was a habit she had, arriving before the crowd gave her a moment to breathe the room in without performing it. She wore deep blue this year, and her hair was different, and the ring on her left hand was new and caught the light in a way she was not yet entirely accustomed to. She was standing near the west terrace, looking out at the garden below, when she felt him before she heard him. "You're early," Raphael said, from just behind her left shoulder. "I'm always early," she said, without turning. "I know." He came to stand beside her, and she could see him in the reflection of the terrace doors. The formal attire, the quiet gravity, the particular stillness of a man who moves through crowds as though they exist around him rather than with him. "I've been early for 20 minutes, waiting for you to arrive." She turned at that. "You waited?" "I wanted to find you before the room did." He offered his hand, palm up, in the exact gesture of a year ago, and his eyes held something that was both serious and warm in the way she had come to recognize as uniquely his. The expression of a man who has stopped being afraid of his own feelings and is simply, quietly, present in them. "No escaping required this time," he said. "Just stay." Novalie looked at his hand for exactly 1 moment. The same hand, the same room, the same man, and not at all the same. Changed by a year of mornings and libraries and hard conversations, and 1 extraordinary dinner and 100 small choices made in either direction. She thought about grabbing a stranger's hand in a moment of desperation, and how it had led, through a long and complicated and beautiful sequence of events, to this. She thought that the best things she had ever done had been the ones she had not planned at all. She put her hand in his. "I wasn't planning to escape," she said. He smiled. A real one, the rare kind that reached his eyes and stayed there. "Good," he said. "I'd have followed you anyway." And the ballroom filled around them, and the music rose, and the season began again, and Novalie Ashwell, who had once stood in this same room trying to be invisible, stood instead at the center of it, her hand in the crown prince's, wearing the ring that meant she never had to be invisible again. Not because he had rescued her, not because he had made her safe, but because she had grabbed a stranger's hand in the dark, and discovered, on the other side of all that fear and pride and careful retreat, that the person she had been reaching for had already been reaching back. Some of life's most transformative moments begin not with a plan, but with a single, impulsive act of courage. Novalie didn't reach for a prince. She reached for a lifeline. And what she found was something far rarer than a crown. She found a man who saw her entirely and chose her anyway. May you have the courage to grab the hand that's already reaching for yours. If this story stayed with you, if Raphael's quiet devotion moved you, or Novalie's courage reminded you of something true, please take a moment to leave a like. It is the smallest gesture, and it means everything to a channel built on stories like this one. Subscribe to the Duke Royal Tales so you never miss what comes next. Every story we tell is made for you, for the late nights, the long commutes, the moments when you need to be somewhere else entirely, somewhere with silk and candlelight and love that fights for itself. And leave a comment. Tell us, what was the moment you knew Raphael was different? Was it the hand at the gala, the garden party, the entrance hall, or something quieter that you caught before we named it? We read everyone. We will see you in the next story. With love, always, the Duke Royal Tales.